So today I'm going to share my second education, share experiences along the spiritual path. I was born in the United States in a little suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the oldest of 13 children. I have 10 sisters and 2 brothers. We were raised in a very traditional, conservative, Catholic family. My education was quite parochial. Even my teachers used to say we're so conservative, in our views. So when I graduated high school, many of my friends went to fight in the Vietnam War. Others went to work in the steel mills of Pittsburgh. I was granted a scholarship to play football and study at Columbia University. So this is back in 1968, in the heyday of the sort of American Second Revolution. The radicals were protesting on campus. The young people were smoking pot, and I was opposed to all of this. Went to school at Columbia in New York City. I arrived on campus, and it was an entirely different world. My life had been very sheltered up to that point. I got a particular perspective on the world. So I arrived on campus, and people were smoking pot, and others were protesting the war in Vietnam, and I was really confronted with evaluating my personal values, that everything in my life was up for question at that point. I remember going to confession in the Catholic Church, and while I was on campus, I had sex, and in the tradition, the Catholic tradition, that was considered sinful. I had to go in and tell the priest, and I told the priest, and he said, "Well, son, are you sorry for your sins?" And I actually wasn't really sorry. I was happy, but I said, "Yes, Father, I'm sorry." And I whispered under my breath, "I'm sorry it's a sin." He said, What, my son? What? I said, "Well, I'm sorry that it's a sin." He said, are you sorry that you did it and resolve never to do it again?" And I looked in my heart and I said, "No, Father, I'm going to have sex as often as I can. I really, really enjoyed it." So I had a falling out with the church. So this was the first of my value systems to come crumbling down. While I was on campus, people began questioning me, my views on the Vietnam War, and educating me on what was happening there. And gradually, I began to change my perspective and see things differently. But I had one experience that stands out that really was a deal breaker for my old values. We were playing against the University of Pennsylvania football game. And I happened to get hit in the chest with a helmet and actually broke my sternum and broke my ribs. And I was taken to the local hospital, St. Luke's, where we on Morningside Heights in New York City shared the hospital with the people in Harlem, which was the low-income part of New York. And I sat there in the hospital with broken ribs, difficult to even breathe, and I saw a whole world that I'd never seen before. People coming in with, one fellow came in with a knife in his back and actually died in the waiting room. Another woman was in the doorway crying, "Please, someone help my husband, he's having a heart attack," and he passed away. I sat in that room for 12 hours watching people come and go, and death was there, and illness, and it totally blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. Growing up, white, privileged, upper middle class, whenever I needed treatment from a doctor, I was able to receive it right away. But living in this place of poverty, I saw an entirely new world. It blew my mind. It was much like, later I read the story of the Buddha, where for the first time in his life, when he was outside the city gates, he saw sickness and poverty and death for the first time, and it totally radicalized, totally changed his view of the world. It had that same effect on me, that somehow all of my values, everything I'd held to be true, came tumbling down. That was a turning point for me. I began looking for another perspective, another way of seeing the world, and I decided to study abroad, to go to other countries in the world and see things from a different point of view. I went to school my sophomore year in Paris, France. Spent my junior year in Beirut, Lebanon, where I was able to study with a Sufi master and had wonderful, wonderful experiences. Began my practice of yoga, learned meditation there. In my senior year, I was able to go to school in a Zen monastery, where I was able to study at the university and live at the same time in a Zen monastery. So I was introduced at an early age to meditation and to spiritual practices, but I didn't really find anything that was completely satisfying for me. Back in 1972, I began a study with the Rosicrucian Fellowship. This is a mystical branch of Christianity, also known as the Freemasons. There's different branches of the Freemasons. And I took a 2-year correspondence course with them. And each week they would send me a lesson. I would read the lesson and answer the questions, and then they would send me the next lesson the following week. After a period of 2 years, I received the last lesson, and it simply said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And it really moved me. I felt the energy, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got the God chills, and I felt that this was really the truth. And it was that week that my yoga teacher told me that she was going to be going to California to meet her guru, Swami Muktananda, and invited me to come along. So we drove from New York to California, and when we arrived, we heard that Muktananda had suffered a series of seizures and was in the hospital in San Francisco. I was heartbroken that I wasn't going to be able to see him, but the next morning he sent a message that he was well enough to see the new arrivals, and so he invited us to come see him. And I remember preparing myself for this initial meeting. I heard he could read people's minds, so I meditated for long periods of time to purify my mind, to make it still and quiet. I heard he sometimes asked people to test questions. I mean, I read from the Zen traditions that a master would often test a new disciple by asking esoteric questions like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Or what did your face look like before your mother was born? One of these test questions. Anyway, I had a couple cups of coffee to make sure that my mind was really alert for that test question. I also put on my spiritual clothes. I had an outfit that I thought was very spiritual. It was a denim jacket with all the signs of the zodiac on it, and I had a pair of jeans with an Om patch on the rear end. So with all these concepts, I went to meet this great guru and to hopefully impress him so that he could accept me as one of his disciples. So I was brought before him and poised for that test question, alert, on my best behavior, my mind quiet. And he looked very lovingly into my eyes and he said, "What's your name?" And my mind went absolutely blank. I couldn't remember my own name. I was mortified. He chuckled and swatted me with his peacock feathers and says, well, where are you from? And again, I couldn't remember. I mean, my mind was completely blank, but I remembered my name. I said, "David Now," proudly. "I'm David Now." He said, "Very good, very good. What type of work do you do?" So he was giving me a chance to express myself. Again, no idea what kind of work I did. I was a filmmaker at the time, but I remembered where I was from. I said, "Baba, I'm from New York." And as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I realized I'm not really from New York. I was living in New York, but I'm from Pittsburgh. So I was mortified. I'd only been with my teacher for 2 minutes, and I'd forgotten my name and told him a lie, told him an untruth. He laughed, swatted me with the peacock feathers again, said, go sit in the corner and meditate for a little bit. He continued to greet other people, and I went and I sat in the corner, and as he was greeting the other people, in a particular moment, he glanced my way, and I saw light coming from his eyes, powerful, bright white light coming from his eyes, entering into my heart, and there was an explosion. It's really difficult to even attempt to describe the experience that I had. But I felt a burst of energy, a feeling of love that I'd never felt before, love for everyone and everything in the universe. The room was filled with light, and I felt a peace that transcends words, a peace that I'd never felt before. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was a transmission of divine energy called Shaktipat, which awakened that same consciousness within me. So I stayed in this state for maybe 3 hours. I came to, I returned back to my normal waking consciousness, and the room was empty. I was by myself in ecstasy, peace. And I knew in that moment that this was my place. I'd found what I was looking for. The path was being revealed to me. So I moved into the ashram immediately. I didn't even go back to New York City to clean up my apartment. I sent a message, just sell everything that's there. I'm gonna stay. And Muktananda was giving a month-long retreat at the time in Arcata, California. And I took that month-long retreat and began to learn meditation and chanting and hatha yoga, began to study the various scriptures of Kashmir Shaivism and Vedanta and the teachings of Patanjali, and I spent the next 8 years living with Muktananda, learning his teachings, doing the practices, and at some point he encouraged me to go out and to become a teacher. Now I moved into the ashram and began doing the spiritual practices, which included chanting, much chanting during the day of these long stotra mantras and meditation. And as I sat for meditation, my body would begin to spontaneously move. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but I had rheumatoid arthritis, and when I met Muktananda, I was on crutches because of the swelling in my feet, and the arthritis had spread throughout my body, and I was in great pain. I used to have to take regular cortisone injections and daily doses of butazolidine in order to just cope with the pain. When I would meditate each day, my body would first of all begin to do spontaneous pranayama, practice called Bhastrika. This would just happen. I'd never heard of it, I'd never done it before, but the energy within me knew that this is what my body needed to heal. So I would do long periods of spontaneous pranayama, followed by spontaneous hatha yoga postures. My head would rotate, my body would rotate, I would move into various asanas, and this would go on for hours at a time. The long and short of the experience is that after a period of 9 months, I had a complete spontaneous remission of rheumatoid arthritis. I went back to my doctor. We were visiting in New York. I saw my doctor and he was amazed. He'd never seen anything quite like this, that the complete and total remission of rheumatoid arthritis with no deposits left over. And this is some 50 years later, and I've had no return of the arthritis. So I lived with Muktananda with him and in his ashrams for the next 8 years. And I had many, many wonderful experiences of meditation and chanting. Remember sitting at my Baba's feet one evening when he gave a lecture that he called, it was a story about peace follows renunciation. And that was the conclusion of the story that I took away, that peace follows renunciation. And I was quite inspired by this talk. So I decided spontaneously within me to renounce the world, to renounce everything. So I went out and shaved my head, gave away the little money that I had, and chose to renounce the world. Gathered my hair up, put it in a little brown bag, and came during darshan and presented this bag to my guru. You know, I remember him leaning forward, eager to see what was in the bag, and when he saw it, he was like, "Oh my God!" You know, it was like really gross. And I told him, "Baba, I've renounced the world." He looked at me and said, "Don't renounce the world. Just renounce your ego. Renounce your your sense of separation. And take this hair as a symbol and toss it in the bay. So there was a bay there, Alameda, California, and immediately I went to the bay and took the hair and threw it in the water and announced that I was renouncing the world. So the hair sunk below the water, and immediately it popped back up. I was mortified. Here I was renouncing the world, but the hair wasn't renouncing the world. So I took a stone and threw it and hit the hair, and the hair went down, but then it popped back up. And I kept trying to sink the hair, because this was a symbol of my ego, but it wouldn't stay down. What a great symbol, for my life, that the ego just keeps cropping back up, But I've since learned that, killing the ego or destroying the ego really isn't the point of sadhana. It's to learn the right identity. If we think of ego as wrong identification, as identifying with our body and identifying with our thoughts and our bank account and what we do, that consists of the ego. We do practices in order to have true identification with who we are. We learn to recognize the self. One of my dear friends, Swami Shankarananda, asked my Baba, Baba, I have such a big ego. What should I do? How can I get rid of my ego? And Muktananda said to me, the problem isn't that your ego's too big. The problem is that your ego's too small. You identify with the body, your thoughts, your mind, and what you do. Identify with the self, with Paramatma. Identify with universal consciousness. That's the proper understanding of the use of the ego. So I've wrestled with the ego over the years and have done my best to purify that ego. Whenever I get upset or I lose control in my life, I tell my friends, I'm having an ego attack. So I'm able to see it, to separate it out and no longer. So I was living in the ashram and just loving my experiences with my teacher and just loving my guru. And in a sense, even worshiping the ground that he walked on. And I began to have an inner conflict, having been raised a Christian, that Jesus was the Son of God. And so I began to have this inner conflict about how could I be worshiping, how could I be loving another being. And I was wrestling with this question. And we were chanting one day, we were chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna mantra, when suddenly my consciousness was drawn within. The only way, and it's difficult to describe this, but it was as if my consciousness dropped from my head to my heart. And I was no longer seeing through my eyes, through my head, but seeing the world through my heart. It was as if I was inside of a cave. And in the distance I could see a light, a beautiful white light, coming closer and closer. And as the wave of light entered into my being, I felt this waves and waves of love and of bliss. And as the light got closer, I could see that the light was emanating from the heart of Jesus. Now, being raised Catholic, my Ishta Devata was the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So this was an extraordinary vision, that Jesus was appearing to me as light. As the body of Christ came closer and closer, I actually was able to enter into the heart. And within the heart, I saw my guru, Muktananda, seated in meditation, and the light was emanating from his heart. My vision got closer and closer. I entered into the heart of Muktananda, and I peeked inside, and I saw my own self sitting there in meditation. And I was shocked. I was surprised that at the core of all this was my own self, my own being. I remember being surprised. And I heard the voice of my guru saying, "So what did you expect to find here but your own self?" So this was a tremendously healing vision. It healed the sense of separation and any doubts that I might have about whatever tradition I should follow, that I began to see that the truth in Christianity, the truth in Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam is the same truth, that the goal, the purpose of a human life is to know this inner self, and that self transcends any religion or any sectarianism, any particular sect that we might be drawn to. So this healed my fear of practicing in a tradition that was alien to my being. And I lived very comfortably in the ashram with my guru. One weekend I went home to visit my family in Columbus, Ohio. And I spent the weekend there, and a friend of mine was going to fly us back to New York. He had just got his pilot's license and rented a Piper Cub to fly. There were 3 of us that were going to come back. So I was delighted. I didn't have to, take public transportation. I was going to get a ride back to the ashram. So the morning of the flight, we arrived, and there were these series of delays. There wasn't gas available for the plane. There was a mechanical problem. A couple hours passed, and we still hadn't taken off. So we left about 11 in the morning. We're in the air about 1 hour, and the pilot shares with us that in his meditation in the morning, Muktananda had appeared to him and said, "I'm really happy that you're coming to see me, but make sure that you leave by 10 o'clock. When he said that, I was struck. We left at 11 o'clock. No, I said to Phil, I said, why didn't you tell us that before we took off? We left at 11. He said, we'll be taken care of. So it's a long flight in a single engine plane from Columbus, Ohio to upstate New York in the Catskill Mountains. And about 4 or 5 hours into the flight, there was suddenly great turbulence outside. A storm had kicked up, and there was a thunderstorm. And we were being buffeted from place to place, and the visibility was very poor. So the pilot called ahead to the control tower and said, we're stuck in this storm. Can you guide us in? And the control tower said, we'll use your instruments. You can fly in by instruments. And Phil said, well, I'm a new pilot. I haven't been qualified to fly by instruments, so there's no way that we could find our way to the airport. So it was getting dark. It was almost dark at this point, and the pilot was unable to fly by sight or by instruments. So we started looking for a field to land the plane. And I was suddenly struck with fear. And I remember the week before, my Baba gave a talk where he said that whatever your last thought is, that will determine your future incarnation. So try at the moment of death to repeat the mantra, and that will be a blessing for you. So I started feverishly repeating the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, and the 3 of us in the plane began chanting this together. I remember the control tower saying, what are you saying? What are you saying? We shut the mechanism off, the mic, and just continued repeating Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And I remember praying, well, Lord, if we're going to go, if we're going to die, make it quick so I can repeat the mantra and not be worried about the physical pain. So we saw a field. We knew we had to land. This was in the Catskill Mountains, so there weren't very many places to land. So I remember Phil making the decision to land the plane, and we're all chanting Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, and the plane was tilted, the wings were cutting through the trees and the field was appearing, and Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. We get lower and lower. It was a cornfield, so we kept getting lower and lower and lower, and there was a barn coming up. Suddenly we hit a ditch, the plane flipped over, and we were unharmed. Now, what I didn't know, which I found out later, was at the time this was happening, Muktananda was telling his satsang what was going on. He was saying, there are 3 men, they're coming to see me, and they're repeating the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, and the mantra is going to save them from certain death. So We arrived at the ashram, and his longtime devotee, Amma, was there to greet us. She brought us immediately into Baba's satsang. We sat at his feet, and he was sitting cross-legged, and I remember putting my head on his feet, just in great devotion. And it was as if my head was connected to an electric socket with so much energy, powerful energy, and it was vibrating. And once again, I went into this state of complete ecstasy. I have no idea how long I was there, but when I turn around and go back to a seat, I needed some help. There was somebody on my arm. All the forms in the meditation hall had disappeared. There was only light. There was this beautiful, scintillating blue light. There was consciousness everywhere. And if I really focused my mind, I could see a form. I couldn't tell it was a man or a woman. There was just energy taking the form of individual people there. So they helped me back to my seat, and I stayed in this ecstatic state for several days, just seeing consciousness everywhere, this beautiful, scintillating blue light. I felt nothing but love, peace, ecstasy, and I wanted to remain in this state completely. But after 3 days, it began to fade. So I continued living in the ashram, studying with my teacher. And one of his primary teachings was to see God in everyone. He said, don't even see faults. In fact, he was giving a talk about everything is consciousness, see the divine in everyone and everything. And I remember he specifically looked right at me and said, don't even see faults. So I felt as if he was talking directly to me, because I had this ability to find faults in everyone and everything. I could always zero in on what was wrong with somebody, including myself. I was very judgmental. So at the time, I was living at the ashram and working on Wall Street, raising money to drill oil wells. And this was a Monday morning after my intensive with Baba. And I was on my way to work on Wall Street. So I had my nice 3-piece suit, and nice, beautiful Florsheim shoes, and Crouch and Fitzgerald briefcase. And I was on my way to the subway to go to work on Wall Street. And I was practicing seeing everything as consciousness. God is here, God is there, everything is consciousness, and was really doing this particular practice. At that moment, I saw a man up on a stand with all sorts of placards and signs, and he was one of these sort of crazy guys in New York that like to rant and rave. The end of the world is coming, save yourself, the end is nigh. And there was a crowd of people around him watching him pretty much make a fool of himself. He was a little bit crazy. So I began this wrestling match. I saw him as being crazy. That was my perspective. Oh, he's nuts. I'm not going to slip. I'm going to see him as consciousness. Everything is consciousness. God dwells within this man as his true self. But then the thought occurred, he's making a fool of himself. Let me stop for 1 minute and just enjoy watching him make a fool of himself. At that very moment, I stepped in a big pile of dog shit, and I slid in the dog shit. The dog shit splashed, it got all over my shoes, I dropped my bag, and I was really upset. Oh my God, I'm on my way to work and I got this shit on my shoes, and I was jumping up and down, making a complete fool of myself, and that crowd of people that was watching the man with the placards came and were watching this crazy man in a beautiful Brooks Brothers suit and make a complete fool of myself. So that was a great learning for me, that the world is as we see it. If we see consciousness everywhere, if we see the divine in another person, we'll be elevated to that experience. If on the other hand, we find faults in other and see other people as fools, we're really creating that experience for ourselves. So I lived in the ashram for several years, was experiencing deep meditation, and truly, by this time I'd earned enough money that I didn't have to work that I could just simply live in the ashram and enjoy the daily meditations and the chanting and the courses. And I was pretty much in bliss all the time. I really enjoyed my life. At that moment in time, Baba sent a message that he wanted me to work in the kitchen. Now, people who worked in the kitchen didn't meditate, didn't chant, didn't have time to go to the courses. The day began at 3:30 in the morning, and you had to be there and chop the vegetables and the fruits for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And this is not something that I really wanted to do. I was never good in the kitchen. I mean, I had 10 sisters who liked to do all the cooking, so I was very resistant to my new task of working in the kitchen. But I surrendered to it. I accepted it. And chopped cucumbers and bananas and various fruits. But I wasn't really very good at it because I hadn't given my heart completely dedicated myself to this seva, this particular work. So after a period of 6 months or so in the kitchen, my Baba came in one day and we were chopping cucumbers. And I had cut part of this cucumber, so it was about half of it left. And he looked at me and said, "Give me the knife." He took that piece of cucumber, and this was a 74-year-old man. He went, "Shh." I'd never seen anybody chop so beautifully, so quickly. It was like a bolt of lightning, shh, like that. And every piece was perfectly fine, perfectly chopped. And he looked at me and said, "There's 30 pieces there. Count the pieces." I was amazed. So I counted the pieces, and there were only 27. So I was in a dilemma. I was in a pickle. Should I tell the truth and blow his cover, or should I say that there's 30? So I decided to be perfectly honest. I said, "Baba, there's," reluctant, I said, "there's only 27 pieces there." He laughed. He said, "Turn the knife over." Sure enough, turned the knife over, and there were 3 pieces stuck to the other side of the knife. And he looked at me and said, "That's meditation. You should learn to chop like that. One-pointedness, skill in action. This is the true meditation." So having received the teachings directly from my teacher, this became my passion. I decided to learn to chop like my Baba chopped. So for another 6 months or so, that's all I did, was focus my mind on learning to chop vegetables. And over a period of time, I'd become the sort of the head chopper. I'd been in charge of the choppers, and I had a whole team of people peeling bananas and preparing the vegetables and the fruits so that I could chop them. This particular day, we were chopping bananas. And as I said, a whole team of people peeling the bananas, and I was chopping them. And at this particular day, I noticed that I was able to see the space between the chop, that my experience of chopping was filled with light. I was filled with ecstasy, and I was moving faster than I'd ever chopped before. It was like those old martial arts movie where everything seems to be in slow motion, but we're moving very quickly. So I'm chopping in this state of complete ecstasy, complete one-pointedness, when I hear a knock on the door. And it's my Baba at the door. Through his translator, he says, "Your time in the kitchen is complete. You should go teach." So the next day I was the master of ceremony at his programs, and we traveled the world for the next few years, and I got to open the programs and introduce the speakers and to serve as the sort of master of ceremonies at my Baba's programs. Some years passed. And one day my Baba came into my room and said, "You're going to be receiving sannyas next week. What would you like your name to be?" And I had never really thought about a name, but I was reading the Brahma Sutras. So I looked down and I said, "My Brahamananda." He said, "Very good, you'll be known as Brahamananda." So sure enough, the following week I took sannyas with Muktananda, and we went through a long ceremony, a week-long ceremony of various rituals, including giving away all our possessions and performing our own funeral ceremony. And then taking a dip in the sacred river. At the end of the ceremony, we went back to my Baba's room. There were a few of us who had taken the sannyas. We were in his private quarters, and he gave us the final initiation, where he took a sheet, a blanket, and covered his head and my head, and he whispered into my ear, "Aham Brahmasmi." And in that moment, there was a transmission of that awareness, where suddenly I was, in fact, Brahamananda. And Baba told me, he said, there's no need to repeat this as a mantra. Just whenever you forget who you are, just remember this moment and shift back into the awareness that I am Brahman. Just simply repeat the sound, Aham Brahmasmi, and enter into that consciousness. And do the best you can to live permanently in this awareness. So after that, my Baba sent me off to teach. Sent me off to LA. In fact, we were at a program where he was teaching, and he said, LA, this is your Swami. Treat him with the same love and respect that you give me. He'll be your teacher here in Los Angeles. So I felt very empowered by that. I didn't feel that I was capable of it, but he said, just imitate me. Just give the teachings that I've given you, and you can even give Shaktipat. He instructed me how to give Shaktipat, how to conduct the major intensives, and had me sit at his feet as he did these particular ceremonies. At the end, he even gave me his clothing that he wore at the intensives, gave me his peacock feathers, his sandals, and said, now you should teach. Give Shaktipat at these intensives. So when Baba told me I was being left behind in Los Angeles as the spiritual director of SYD LA, I was, in one sense, quite honored, but at the same time I was heartbroken, because I knew inside that I would never spend the time with my physical Baba again. So I wept for a solid month, and I remember being called in for a final darshan. It was here where he gave me his padukas and his peacock feathers and his final teachings. Remember, he pulled me close, and I was expecting some Mahavakya or some great teaching. He looked at me and said, clean your own room. I was amazed. This was his final teaching to me. My mother had said the same thing, clean your room. But he was really saying, don't let other people serve you. Don't let other people clean up after you. Clean your own room. Remain humble. You know, and those words have become like a mantra to me. Clean your own room, meaning clean the space in my consciousness. Don't go to sleep at night with grievances or upsets. Clean your room every night. Make sure that your plate is clean every day. So this was his final teaching to me. Keep the mind pure. Remember the self. Remember Aham Brahmasmi, that I am Brahman. Shivoham, I am Shiva. Hamsa, I am that. And this is my blessing to you. Tattvam asi, thou art